Primero, bienvenidos y muchísimas gracias por compartir con nosotros este día tan especial. Especial porque tenemos hoy aquí a Jonas Prising, nuestro CEO y presidente mundial. Tenemos a Mara Swan, que es nuestra directora de Estrategia global y Talento. Y tenemos también a Stefano Scabio, que es nuestro presidente de toda la parte de región mediterránea y los países del este. Y es importante porque queremos hablar y compartir con vosotros todo lo que hemos contado en Davos desde hace 10 años, pero especialmente los últimos 2, donde hemos hablado mucho, ¿no?, de todo lo que tiene que ver con el talento, de todo lo que tiene que ver con el desajuste de talento, con la guerra de las competencias, con la revolución de las competencias. Y yo creo que para nosotros hoy poder tener a estas 3 personas compartiendo con vosotros todo lo que en definitiva creemos que va a pasar, vosotros que creéis en que las personas son precisamente el motor de la transformación de vuestras compañías, pues creo que poder no solo compartir, sino que también os hagáis las preguntas, ¿no?, que consideréis y que podamos también aterrizar, ¿no?, en esta realidad que tenemos, dónde va el mundo y especialmente dónde va nuestras compañías, ¿no?, desde el punto de vista del impacto que puede tener. La segunda gran noticia que queríamos compartir con vosotros es el lanzamiento de PowerU. PowerU es la mayor plataforma de empleabilidad que hay en España para jóvenes y queríamos también, bueno, unir las dos, ¿no? Como veis, la importancia, ¿no?, de las competencias y especialmente de las 8 de las que vamos a hablar hoy y de cómo hemos conseguido, gracias a muchos de vosotros, pues hacer que PowerU vaya y esté siendo ya la mayor plataforma de empleabilidad del país. El tercer motivo por el cual es un día tan especial para nosotros es que, bueno, estrenamos edificio. Esta es nuestra nueva sede en Madrid. Le hemos llamado Talent Tower, es decir, donde creemos que a partir de ahora podemos seguir impulsando, ¿no?, pues el empleo y el talento de miles de personas en este país. Y finalmente, nuestro cuarto motivo es que queríamos que estuviese aquí, bueno, nuestra ministra, la ministra de nuestra industria, ¿vale? Y hace escasamente 20 minutos nos ha llamado que no va a ser posible que venga aquí por las razones que conocéis todos de cómo están algunos de los temas que tiene entre manos. Pero en todo caso me ha pedido que os disculpe su presencia hoy aquí. En todo caso, iremos a lo largo de estas 90 minutos y vamos a ir contándoos cómo creemos nosotros o hacia dónde va el Wall of War, este mundo del empleo. Voy a dar la palabra ahora a Stefano Scabio para que presente un poco a Jonas Prising y a Mara Swan. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Raúl. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, good afternoon. Thank you for coming. We are delighted to be here with you today in a beautiful Madrid with really a spring weather. So it's fantastic. And we will have a nice conversation about talent, you know, the importance of talent, which is the key asset to stay relevant and competitive in any industry, in any markets. And we are in the Talent Tower, so we are in a perfect environment, I would say. So before taking over to Jonas, I want to set a little bit the stage. This year at Davos, we'll launch the Skills Revolution paper, where we are saying that helping people to upskill and adapt to the new challenges, you know, it's really crucial for their development and for stay relevant in the labor market. So I believe it's an important statement because we are actually shifting from an old paradigm, which is taking care of jobs, to the new one, which means taking care of career development. It's a really an important shifting. And you know that we are living in a lot of uncertainty. We see every day. And we can say that certainty is the only uncertainty. That's what we used to say. So I believe we need really to understand as leaders of companies, of organizations, how to be responsible and responsive in order really to upskill and reskill people to stay relevant in the market as employers, as organizations, as well as individuals, because we want to stay employable in the market. So those are a little bit the main things, but I'm sure that Jonas will tell you much more things that you ever listened before. So it will be very, very exciting to listen to Jonas about the conversation that we have at Davos. So Jonas, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And good evening. Let me add my welcome to all of you to the ManpowerGroup Talent Tower, which we're delighted to have occupied for exactly 3 days. So if you go different places and some things don't work, don't worry, they will probably work at some point later, but we have just moved in here. It's also a great pleasure for me to be back here in Madrid at our new offices. I came to Spain while working with ManpowerGroup for the first time 18 years ago. So I have seen a very big evolution of our company here over the last 18 years. And what I will try to do is to illustrate for you the journey that we are taking as an organization based on our understanding of what is going to happen what is happening and what is going to be happening in labor markets. And what you have seen us do in Spain, especially over the last 6 years, is really the manifestation of the strategies that we're pursuing based on our understanding of the changes that are occurring in the world of work. So what I'd like to do is to limit myself, although this is a topic I'm passionate about, for maybe 20 minutes, and then together with Mara, be able to answer any questions and or engender a discussion about things that I'm sure you are also extremely passionate about. But maybe to give you a little bit of a background to our perspective on what is happening in labor markets and why we think the things that we think and why we're pursuing the strategies that we are pursuing. We are a US-based, New York Stock Exchange listed company, a $20 billion company, active in over 80 countries. We were started 70 years ago. We are unusual from a US perspective in that while we are US-based, headquartered in Milwaukee, which is an hour and a half north of Chicago, and we are listed in the New York Stock Exchange, 85% of our business is outside of the US. We employ 3.5 million people every year, and we meet 10 million job seekers every year in 80 countries. So as you can understand, we have a great understanding of what's happening in 80 labor markets, both from an employer perspective and from a supply and or from a candidate and job seeker perspective. And that's really, the basis for the data analysis that we make today and that we have continued to make, for a number of years. And, for all of you that are very familiar with labor markets, you know that labor markets generally are regarded as cyclical animals. So when the economic cycle goes up, unemployment goes down, and when the economic cycle goes down, unemployment goes up. And of course, unfortunately, here in Spain, as well as in many other parts of the world, you've really felt the brunt of what happens when the economy goes down and how high unemployment can go up. But and this is really what we saw and what we've seen over at least the first 57 years of our history at ManpowerGroup. But about 10 years ago, we started to see labor markets behave in ways that were not cyclical. And strangely, we started to see labor markets that were not connected overtly behave in similar ways in developed markets, and emerging markets starting to manifest changes that were clearly not cyclical because they were growing fast, but were structural. And we identified 4 big structural changes that we launched in Davos about 8 years ago. And the structural changes, I'll talk about them briefly because I think it helps our discussion later on as to why we think a skills revolution is needed, why we think learnability is going to be a strategic asset for organizations and for individuals and for societies. But you are, I'm sure, very familiar with them already. So I'll just remind you very quickly. Demographics. The world is aging rapidly, certainly in Europe. Do you know which country is the only country of Western Europe, if I can use the old terminology, that is growing, whose population is growing? Of size, I should say of size. What do you think? Which country comes to mind? Which one do you think has a growing population? So which means a fertility rate that is higher than 2.1, right? Because that's what you need. And Spain's is well below. I think you are at, 1.7, 1 point, even lower. Yeah, even lower, okay. France. So don't be confused. When you read about the French unemployment being very, very high and one of the worst markets in Europe, you should all know that there are more jobs being created in France in 2016 than in 2015. But more people are exiting, but at the same time, the population growth makes it more people are entering than are finding jobs. So the percentage of the unemployment rate goes up, but the population is actually growing. So populations are aging in the developed world. Populations are also aging in the emerging world. Populations are aging. What took us 115 years to achieve in terms of lifespan is taking China 30 years. So they are racing, many emerging markets are racing to get rich before they get old because they have no wealth as nations to support an aging population. So their lifespan is increasing at more than double the rate that we experienced over a long period of time. So they have exactly the same issue, but they are not as wealthy. So don't be confused. Economic growth is good, but their populations are aging at a much more rapid rate. So what does this mean? That means that for employers in many countries, finding the people is hard. We've done business in Japan for the last 55 years. You cannot find people in Japan for love nor money. The unemployment rate is close to 3%. One worker supports 2 retirees. And if you're wondering, what Japan is doing about it and why there are so many robots being manufactured in Japan, both consumer robots and healthcare and manufacturing robots, is that their strategy to counter this is to become the most automated society in the world because they do not want to have immigration. Their strategy is to be a homogeneous society, and their culture, as many of you know who visited Japan, is pretty hard to understand. So they are thinking, look, we don't need a lot of new people here. We need a lot of robots that's going to help us do this. So access to talent is difficult in itself because the populations are shrinking in almost all of Europe. US is steady. Most emerging markets are still having growth. China is peaking in 20 years. India continues, but the birth rates are coming down very, very fast. So it means the pool of labor is actually, the growth is slowing, and in developed markets it's turning, and it's going to start to shrink in many countries. That's one trend that I'm sure you're very familiar with. The impact of how companies are managing their business is having a big impact onto labor markets. The most extreme example of that would be the reaction of the US employers in the face of a sudden deceleration of the economy in 2008. If you remember, within 3 months, the US was at a rate of losing 500,000 jobs a month. So it goes from 2007 is great, 2008 so-so, and then boom, the Lehman crisis hits, and employers are pulling back immediately. What we see when we look at how employers behave, both in developed and in emerging markets for that matter, is that they have been consuming labor, not creating talent, probably for the last 15 to 20 years. Their strategy has been, with the help of technology and globalization, I can get work done in many different ways, and I will use those ways to get the work done and not really worry too much about creating a talent pipeline, which works beautifully in a world which has a lot of talent, but works very, very poorly in a world where talent is becoming harder to find, and especially skilled talent. Individuals, which is the third trend, are making different choices. And we have a contrarian view based on our research of why millennials behave the way they behave, or younger generations behave the way they behave. We don't think that the millennial generation has any base aspirations that are any different than what our generations have. Their basic needs are the same. They'd like to have a good life. They'd like to have a good career. They'd like to have stability. They want to have houses and cars and all these other things. However, they know jobs for life. They look around. They look at their parents. They look at the world. They say, look, jobs for life, that's out. Skills is my only way of making sure I'm employable. So people with skills in that generation are much more willing to move jobs because they know that their employability is secure if they have marketable skills. So as employers, we interpret this as lack of loyalty, lack of interest in the company, not believing in the future of this particular organization, whereas in fact millennials are really, and other younger generations are really just reacting to a completely different context. Just as Stefano said, where volatility is the norm and certain uncertainty is the environment that we try to run our businesses in. So they are acting in a way which is entirely rational, but while at the same time having the same base aspirations as many. And of course, they grow up in a context which is, they're global citizens, they're digital natives. So, there are things that each generation has which is very, very different. But we don't think that their basic fundamental desires are very different from other generations based on the research that we have. And then the fourth driver, which of course you've been waiting for me to talk about, is the impact of technology. So digitization is pervasive. It is changing things in many different ways, and let me give you a couple of examples. First of all, what we can clearly see today is that employers are looking for talent with the right skills, preferably instantly productive. And what you can see in almost every developed country is that there is a bifurcation and a polarization of the workforce between those that have no or low skills. So there's no growth in those jobs. And if you're outside and you don't have a job, your likelihood to get a job is extremely low. In Spain, you're long-term unemployed. 25% of them have been, unemployed for more than 3 or 4 years. They clearly are out of the market. Whereas people with the skills have choices, are willing to move between companies to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the market. And they will have many, many different opportunities. So the average unemployment rate from our perspective is reasonably uninteresting. So the US has had great employment for people with the right skills for the last 4 years, well below pre-recession levels. But people with no or low skills have had 3 or 4 times the level of unemployment than those with the right skills. And we see these trends accelerating. So really, the difference between the haves and have-nots is very well reflected in the unemployment numbers in terms of those who have no skills or low skills and those who have very marketable skills. And those are, of course, the people who have the skills to take advantage of globalization and technology tools that help them become more productive, which is what employers are looking for. So 2 things happen. Employers, even in countries with high unemployment rates, say we can't find people because they don't have the right skills and they're not work ready, number 1. And in 2 cases in 2016, you saw very unexpected election results, which are not explainable based on data. You cannot say that the world did not get better because of trade and immigration, because the data clearly says, on aggregate, we lifted 1.5 billion people out of poverty. And a specific country, like the UK, on average, has had one of the highest growth rates over the last 30 years on an annual basis. In terms of the US, you can't say that the length of the recovery and the unemployment is sky high, because the unemployment is almost at full employment. Today at 4.7, or at the time of the election, 4.9%. So almost full employment. So there's no data point that would tell you, no wonder people aren't happy. But what's clear is that there's a part of the population that is not participating in the opportunities. There's then the other part of the population that looks at them that didn't get the opportunity, is extrapolating what's going to happen to them in the future, and in anticipation of the bad things that are going to happen to them due to technological progress, they're saying, okay, we're not happy about this either. And that's when we saw a tipping point of what can happen when these forces that are structural in nature really are let to run unchecked and without new approaches to try and bridge it. Of course, there are also other reasons behind the changes, but I observe that every person thinks about their market from a labor market perspective and their country from a country perspective. But from our observation, we see exactly the same thing happening in almost all developed countries. I was born in Sweden. Sweden did not have an anti-immigration, anti-trade, anti-EU party 6 years ago. Today that party has 22% of the electorate and probably could be the biggest party in Sweden. Podemos in Spain, Cinque Stelle in Italy, the Brexit decision in the UK, you name it. All of these markets that either are doing well or not doing so well have something in common. They all have part of the populations that are saying, look, this is not for us, this is changing in ways that are highly disruptive. So all of this to say that a lot of the discussion that we had at the World Economic Forum in Davos was to say that, okay, things have and are changing fundamentally. This is the kind of transformation that happened during the Industrial Revolution. We are in a phase of highly disruptive change, which we have gone through a number of different times before. So at the beginning of 1870 or 1880, on average, in most developed countries, 60% of the population was engaged in agriculture. Just 40 years ago, probably 36% of any workforce in a developed, industrialized country was involved in manufacturing. What do you think the average global number involved in manufacturing is today as a percentage of the workforce? On average, 18%, including emerging markets. In the whole discussion in the US about trade with China has ruined jobs in the US because we have lost a third of the jobs. Every country that has a manufacturing base has lost a third of their jobs in exactly the same time period. Germany has lost a third of its jobs. UK has lost more than a third of its jobs. Italy has lost more than a third of its jobs. So it is a structural change that technology has driven. It's got nothing to do with trade. It's all around automation, because primarily automotive and metal manufacturing industries have seen that big a reduction. Of course, that's the concern around automation in the future. So you can see how these structural changes are actually now coming to the surface. We talked about them 8 years ago as the human age. Today, I think everybody is aware that, okay, hang on, these things are real, they are changing, and when they happen to be unchecked, the outcomes can be very unpredictable and actually increase the volatility and the uncertainty, which was already there from the beginning, which is very difficult, for businesses to navigate as a whole. So our overall conclusion on the changes that are happening, in these labor markets is that we believe most labor policies. So if you read things in the papers, that over the coming days, I was a little bit harsh with the Spanish government and the labor market policies here. However, positive that some progress had been made, of course, because we don't want to get shot. But these policies are really all built around providing job security for the job. They are not focused on providing employment security in an environment where lots of different ways of getting jobs done, work done, will become the norm in many ways. And when you build, and we have a labor market that's only focused on jobs, and that is your focus, you build barriers, there's no fluidity between the ins and outs, and it creates huge barriers. It creates a two-class system between the people who have the permanent full-time job and everybody else. High youth unemployment, high degrees of temporary or fixed-term contracts, so that organizations can have this flexibility. And progressive countries are really moving towards employment security. It's just what, as Stefano said, the shift has to go from the job, which is not for life anymore, to the employment security, so that you accept the fact you will change jobs many times, but when you make those changes, you are supported. Maybe you have a basic income between jobs. Certainly you have access to skills and development and training to a much greater degree than what is readily available today. Because we think, as we look at these trends as it relates to skills, the polarization, the acceleration of the trends are accelerating apart. They're not stopping, they're not stabilizing, and they're not converging. And if we don't start to think about the need of a skills revolution, you will have more people who feel that they're not participating. And policymakers, of course, look at these trends, they hear the unhappy part, and they start to talk about things that would make it the way it was 40 years ago. Stop trade, immigration is bad, people from other countries are stealing our jobs and they're getting paid, lower wages, and that's the problem. Of course, that's not the case, nor does the data support that that is the case. But from a political perspective, if you say that to an individual who feels that they're not having, a great future, you're going to say, well, I knew I was getting screwed. I knew this was not good, and it's not my fault, for sure. And, now let's go and try something different. So the need to systemically address this and build skills, reskill and upskill the workforce at a systemic national level is going to be the imperative. It's not going to be to create new jobs. It's going to be to addressing this skills gap that is occurring. From an individual perspective, what we also talked a lot about when we were in Davos was this need for lifelong learning, what we call learnability. Because these trends of accelerating change makes it very difficult for all of us as employers to say, look, 10 years out, 15 years out, these are the skills I need. We are very inaccurate even going out more than 12 months. Most organizations know what they need now and for the next 6 months and the jobs that they can't fill. Very poor predictor in terms of educational institutions to tell what it is that's needed. And it's understandable because the changes are occurring at a rapid pace. So we're doing a lot of research around what we call learnability, or the LQ, the learnability quotient, which is really, IQ used to be the way many governments, many organizations hired people. Hiring people based on IQ is a terrible predictor of work performance. And data eventually showed that this is right, so okay, don't do IQ testing. Clearly, EQ is a very important component in a world where human relationships, collaboration and communication, softer skills are increasingly important. We think LQ, so learnability, and Mara, I'll ask you later to maybe talk more about LQ, is going to be the best predictor of your employability as an individual. So whether you are interested in and have the desire and ability to acquire new skills during your career is going to make you more interesting as a candidate than whether you have specific hard skills, but you have no desire to acquire new skills as you go on in life. And we talked earlier a little bit about the rapidly changing needs. When I look at technology companies, they are in a fiercely competitive and brutal environment, where you go from the innovation to a great selling product, to maturity, to obsolescence in 6 years. Which means you had hot skills, really big skills in demand, to pretty mature skills, now to maintenance skills, and then possibly automation for a lot of it. And you've built a workforce pyramid, that has also acquired rights and had wage inflation, which means that a lot of the stuff that a lot of legacy players are dealing with today, if you were to start the organization from scratch, would be priced at lower skill sets and at 30% less cost. Which is why you see this huge shift in some industries that say, look, I don't need 30% of these people, but I need 25% of these new people. And it's just a reflection of this inability of the individuals, but also the ability of organizations to help them make that shift over time so that they keep on developing skills so you don't have to go through these very, very big and massive changes. So when you then translate all of this, and of course I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with all of you here tonight, and I'd love to hear more of your comments and questions in a little while. This is not the reason why we do this research. We do this research and this data to understand what it is that we need to do as a company, and plot our strategy against those trends and the needs that we believe you as organizations will have going forward. So when I came here, even if I just came here only 12 years ago, we were in Spain known as Manpower, the temporary staffing company. And today you see the ManpowerGroup Talent Tower, ManpowerGroup, the global workforce solutions company. So we have diversified our business in response to the changes that we see happening in the labor markets, which means what? Build expertise and capabilities and higher level skills, because we think that's where the majority of your demand and your talent pain is going to come from, which is what Experience does. You will certainly want to have operational and strategic flexibility with the people that you have in many positions, as well as permanent recruitment needs, which is what Manpower does and did in the past and continues to evolve. You will also, as organizations in a very volatile environment, rethink what you think is core and non-core to your organization. The idea that you, on a wholesale basis, would give to us as recruitment specialists the responsibility to recruit tens of thousands of people on your behalf across the world, 5 or 6 or 10 years ago would seem like the most stupid idea that you've ever heard. Yet our fastest growing business is to recruit over 250,000 people on a permanent basis per year for client organizations who've decided, look, the actual fact of bringing people to my organization is not a strategic capability. My strategic capability is to be able to define who I need and then what I do with them once they're inside the organization. So, we see a very strong shift in terms of the understanding of what's core and non-core, and we believe it will continue going forward as well, because what you consider core and non-core today may become irrelevant, non-core, and something else becomes core as your market adapts. And then from a right management perspective, and that's what our solutions business does. And then the right management business is really all about, if people are going to leave organizations a lot, you really want to make sure that you have a great employer brand also for the people who leave. Because if they are going to be working for 50 or 60 years over time, you don't want to have a brand that is tarnished in the market. Before it was important, but was it that material? Maybe not. Today, a couple of bad reviews, a brand or a labor issue in Brazil and factory in Manaus can have global consequences for your brand and your employer brand. So that is what we are aiming to do with our right management business. So we've diversified our business very, very significantly. And essentially the business that we had on the manpower side has grown nicely for us, but we've doubled the overall size of the organization here in Spain, all through the diversification. So the company that you are familiar with here in Spain, ManpowerGroup Spain, is really a manifestation of the direction that we are going to strategically so that we can respond to your needs as organizations going forward. The way we think about this in the company, though, is that we are trying to gain transient competitive advantage. We don't think about sustainable competitive advantage as durable in time. We think a capability we need to have is time to value to create transient competitive advantage for a certain time period. But we don't think we can build something that will give us competitive advantage for 20 years. We assume in 3 to 4 years, everybody else will be caught up. So you have to constantly be driving the business forward and come up with new ways of creating value. Because exactly like other industries, first we're innovators, then it's a mature product, and then it's something that you think, yeah, okay, anybody can do it, and I don't really know why I should be working with you as opposed to the other company. So that is really something that we're trying to ingrain in our own organization. And Raul and his team have been very successful at doing that in Spain, and I think it's a culture that we are really striving to adopt as a business, while at the same time, in all of this time of rapid change and accelerated disruptive change, the certain uncertainty, which makes it very difficult for us to tell our employees, look, here is where we are today, and 15 years from now, you'll still have this job and we will be there. We can't provide that because we know the market will evolve, and if we don't adapt and change, we probably won't be around for the next 70 years, and our intention is fully to be around for another 70 years and more. But what we can talk about is, look, lots of things will change, but there are some things that won't change, which is who we are, the values that we stand for. And in times like these of highly disruptive change in organizations for employees, but also in society, we believe that responsive and a responsible leadership is going to be a key competitive advantage. And from our organizational perspective, we're building the stability around the values of our organization, the foundational beliefs of our company, which is diversity, which is equal treatment for all, that meaningful and sustainable employment is providing a value well beyond the money that people are paid, but rather a sense of self-worth and an importance and belonging to society so that they feel that they can participate in the growth. So we really see that as an important part of our strategy, not only to run our business extremely well and continue to perform for our shareholders and our stakeholders, but at the same time have a very clear and well-articulated value proposition as it relates to our contribution to what we think are highly disruptive times to societies and to organization. And that duality of purpose for us really, I think, comes across when we look at engagement scores across the organization, even when we do a lot of change and when we drive change that is not necessarily easy for the people, higher expectations, capabilities, higher expectations on skills. So that is how we try to build an extremely adaptive and agile organization, which in itself then is moving at speed and not very stable at times in terms of predictability for the long term, but provide the balance of predictability of who we are and what it is that we're trying to do in terms of our overall purpose and our overall mission. So that was a very quick round-the-world view of what we see happening in labor markets. I tried to put it in the context of the things that you're seeing that maybe you think are unique to Spain, but in actual fact are pretty much happening in most parts of the world, because these forces are all hitting roughly at the same time. So with that, I'd love to have a conversation and any questions that you have. Mara, come, you will have to now help me, because the deal is this: all the easy and nice questions, I take. All the hard, contentious, and difficult questions, Mara takes.
Yeah, okay. Excellent.
Yes, thank you. All right, any thoughts, observations, agreements, disagreements? We like disagreements. Diversity, very important. Disruptive times, diversity of thought prepares you.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
So, I think you gave it a fantastic, well, let's say put fantastic in terms that I think we all identify with what you were thinking.
Yeah.
Now, two questions in one. Diversity, I think, being a woman, I think, what's the role and the opportunity, I think, let's put it this way,
Yep.
that I think society, companies, employers, and women have to really speed up women at work and at certain type of jobs.
Yep.
And the other question is, it's worrying for companies, for employers, and for governments and societies, especially for a country like Spain. What are we going to do with this gap of skills that we find?
Right.
What are we going to do? Because, I mean, we talk about it, but what can we do
Right.
today? I
Yes.
mean, for the future
Yeah.
of the future generations.
No, I like both questions. Now, can I have a first stab on the diversity?
I'll see how you do.
And you'll see how I do, and then you can correct me when it goes wrong. So I talked about economic growth and prosperity, and how most populations are shrinking. Over the course of history, economic growth, the strongest correlation to economic growth is through population growth. I mean, there's two ways you can grow the economy so that more funds are available for the people, right? You can have productivity improve, and you can have more people doing stuff so that you have economic growth. Those are the two ways. Generally speaking, productivity has been able to do this, but always in conjunction with population growth, never on its own. And some people say that the lack of population growth in Japan is the perfect example of a country that is in decline for the last 20 years. Extremely well managed, very homogeneous society, all going to hell in a managed way, with robots and things like that. So then the question is, okay, if that's true, and the workforce participation rate in Spain is 60%, but on average, the workforce participation rate for women is 45% or less. On a global basis, the difference is about 20%. The fastest way to generate economic growth and prosperity is to include what by now is a more educated part of the population, which is women. So some policymakers are starting to wake up to this, and most people have known, as in most policymakers have known it. They don't know what to do about it, or they know what to do about it, but they don't like the cost of doing something about it. So, of course, the inclusion of women is the right thing to do. Of course, by now I think the business case for the diversity, driving diversity of thought, which is the best thing you can have in a highly disruptive environment where impulses are changing all the time. You want to have as much disruptive and diversity of thought within your organization to be able to respond to changes. On top of that, it is clear that the fastest way to address the decrease in the working population is to increase the participation of women, are really three reasons that we really have to have women participate to a much greater degree in the population. And by now, I think it's very clear that all the policies that indicate that please everybody have more kids in various ways, disaster, never work. Singapore, China, whatever it is, unless you're in China and you get shot or you get punished in a very severe way to stop having children. All the other initiatives of paying people more or giving them incentives don't work. The way to do it is to make it easier for women to participate who are carrying a disproportionate burden of taking care of lots of other stuff, so that they also have the ability to participate. All of the countries that do this have participation rates that are equal and are much, much higher than what the global averages are like. So what did I miss and forget in all of this?
I think that's good. I'll talk about how about the company, what company can do, since I think given the questions.
Yeah.
We wrote a paper on this not too long ago on the 7 steps to conscious inclusion, so I won't repeat those. You can look it up online. But I think as companies, so we have the societal issue and we know it's there, so the question is why isn't that happening?
Right.
And it comes down to the leader, and I've been in human resources for 35 years, and I think it gets delegated too low a level in the organization. And I know when Jonas and I first started working together, the first thing I asked him is, what talent legacy do you want to leave? I'm going to help you, but I'm not the person to do it. And so I think the person in this job over here has to believe it first. And then I think there's a couple simple things all of us could be doing. One is we have to encourage more women to be in profit and loss jobs. And when they're not encouraged to be in there, it's hard for women to move up through the organization. And I think the first generation of women that went to work, they're more my age, we all ended up in HR and communications and marketing. And the second generation women have to be in these P&L jobs to move up. And I think the second thing that we've noticed is that our right management business, we did some research, global research, and only 16% of women of people were getting career conversations. And so this has a disproportionate negative impact on women, because women do not raise their hand to do a job. They wait till they're overqualified before they'll apply. And so I think companies, if they're really serious about having women, besides just yakking about it, they should really start having serious career conversations with women. And then I think the last one that I would have is the reason why I'm so passionate about learnability is because right now we try to, hire somebody, I want you to do X, Y, and Z, and then the job changes. What we need to do is hire people for learnability, which is their ability and their curiosity to learn, and men don't have a corner on that. Women have it in equal amounts as men. So I think as we change our hiring practices around what the world needs, I think it's going to be favorable for women. So those are some of the things I would add.
Yeah, and I would tell you how I think about this. I think about it as a cultural change issue. The business case, the moral case is clear. Yeah. The business case is clear. The necessity in terms of results and economic prosperity, they're also clear. So when things are clear but they don't happen, the saying that strategy, culture eats strategy for lunch. Mm-hmm. My assumption is this is a culture issue. So the reason we believe, and the reason I personally believe that I need to tackle it in this way, is to treat it the way I would treat a culture issue, which is to make it socially unacceptable for my leaders not to have the right level of diversity for the benefit of the organization and the future progress of the company. So when I show up at a meeting in an undisclosed location yesterday in one of the countries we visited, the first thing as I walk into the management meeting that the CEO of that country tells me as we walk in, he says, look, I know you're not going to be happy now.
I'm working on it.
But I'm working on it.
And you're like,
And he doesn't say
Doesn't say
anything
what.
else. It's
No.
not, you know,
didn't say
we've not
what.
talked numbers,
No.
we've not talked strategy, we've
No.
not talked about
No.
anything. But the person, the leader knows
Yes.
that this is not something that I find acceptable. Numbers may be great, market position may be great, strategy may be great, potential may be great. You can't sort this out, I'm sorry, this is not going to go, you're not going to move forward. And that way, you cause it to be socially unacceptable, and that becomes a very strong driver of change, because if you want to progress, you know that of all the other things you need to do, this is really not a program or a,
Right.
you know, please tell me you tried and, you know, have a nice slate. I don't care about any of those things. I care about the results, the outcomes. I don't care. I want the outcome. I don't care about the activities that should lead to it.
And not just a figurehead either,
No.
a competent
So
person.
now we've answered this question like in 10 minutes.
But
So,
it was a
you know.
really passionate one.
Yeah.
But you didn't answer the second part.
No, I know. So the second part is, you know, I can tell you what, so clearly organization, so when I said earlier, companies have been consuming labor, not creating talent. What we see happening in organizations that are really having tight labor markets, they are starting to say, look, okay, this whole idea about buying talent on the market and sort of buying the skill when I need it at the price, this is not a good strategy. I have to start developing talent inside the company. And most of them, if they're old enough, they'll say, well, and you know what? This is what we used to do,
Exactly.
or what somebody used to do.
Yeah.
But so it's a little bit back to the future.
Yeah.
Now, how they do it is going to be very different, we believe, and we're seeing it. So that's one. Educational institutions are focused on an outcome, which is to graduate kids.
Yeah.
Their focus is not to get kids to get jobs. And you know, their way of measuring success has to change. And we see this also happening, especially in countries like the US, where it costs huge amounts of money to put kids through school. Today, when they market themselves to parents, and I have 3 kids, they talk about their placement ratio. They don't, you know, it's a good school and they do this and that, but, you know, we place 96% of our students within 6 months of graduating in their chosen field of study.
Right.
This is how they market. So the outcome, how in educational institutions change from, look, I graduate 90% of the people who start at the beginning of their course, is nobody cares.
Right.
You know, it's all going to have to move to, no, I only care about how many people you actually got, how many of the kids that left your school got employed. And then, you know, we also see countries start to encourage this notion of skills. France, Singapore, Denmark, when you lose your job or when you leave school, you know, you have access to a training fund that is your personal fund that you can deploy to buy training. And, you know, that is going to be, you know, a supporting mechanism at a systemic level that is going to be very important. And then last but not least, frankly, it's also down to the individuals. You know, if the individuals don't want to acquire new skills and don't want to be part of an environment that's changing in the way it is changing, whether you like it or not, you know, it's going to be hard. I mean, you can get help, you can get resources, you can even get some funding, you can get companies that want to do it. But if you don't personally have this learnability desire or the learnability within you, you know, it's going to become different. And I think, you know, that's where the school system eventually has to change, in that what they teach is not as much the hard skill and the knowledge, because knowledge is ubiquitously available at very fast speeds. So it's going to be, how do you constantly strive to pick up new ideas in a much more iterative fashion, connected to the world of work, so that you're work ready when you leave school. So those are some of the things that we are actually seeing countries do in a much more systemic way, that are, you know, forward thinking. And then of course you have examples like China,
Just picks a few things.
they just say, look, we have 30,000 engineers, we need 500,000. So those 400 universities that used to be liberal arts, no, you are engineering schools from now on in. And the first 10 years, the engineers they produce, 10% are employable from an international perspective. At this point, 30% of the engineers coming out of China are globally competitive. Another 10 years, 70% of them will be globally competitive. Look at the IT talent in India.
Yeah.
Look at where 80% of everybody coming into the US on these higher level skill visas to work in IT, Guess what?
India.
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 So, they have scale. They have a lot of people. So when they get their machine going, there's a lot of talent that is very, very competitive on a global level. Please.
I think this question goes to Mara, not for the
Perfect.
for
No,
difficulty,
way,
but
generally,
for her,
mostly,
her
way
experience,
better, way better.
Her experience, I guess. In this fast changing environment companies are, what do you think are the most effective ways to learn from the company perspective?
Yeah. I think the most effective one we've seen with adults, because of the fast pace, is a work and learn combination. So I think we've tried online. That doesn't seem, it hasn't really, MOOCs and all those didn't seem to change people's learning. But the way the adults typically learn is they actually learn something in either in a classroom or online in a community, and then they have to go practice it. And I think this is really what we have to do a better job of. But I think some of the companies right now are really working on is actually embedding learning into the work themselves. And I think sometimes as leaders, we have to start thinking about how we help people learn while they're actually working. Because it's expensive to take off a time. People have complicated life. So actually adding and tacking on to the day is not working very well. So those are some of the ones I've seen that are working probably better. And I know we try to, because our people are out so much, we try to have our learning embedded in the things that people do. And I think those are the ones. I don't know if you've seen any other things. Learning is a tough thing because the old ways don't work and the new ways haven't seemed to work too well.
No, but I think the rapid iteration is the one that seems to have been the most successful.
Yeah, from what I've seen.
Yeah.
What are, in your opinion, the 2 or 3 main challenges that the CEO is facing today? I mean, the 2 or 3 topics that should be yes or yes in the agenda. You mentioned, for instance, responsible leadership, what I would say that it's at a very top level. So at that top level, some other challenges that you...
Well, I think that, and we talked about it before, when I started, to work in leadership positions, I used to do scenario planning. We all got together. You talked about the 10-year scenario, 3 ways it could go, and then you said, okay, more or less like this. But basically, you could say, well, I don't really think things will change very much in the next 5 years, so whatever the hell happens, we're probably safe for the next 5 years. Today, I think most leaders recognize that things can change very, very quickly. But whilst it's important to have a long-term vision and strategy, it's very hard to, with any degree of certainty, dedicate all of the resources into one area and say, look, for sure it's going to be like that. So the trick is to be able to build an organization that has a strategic direction, but at the same time is running, the marathon at a very rapid pace and is able to take the turn when it happens. And from a leadership perspective, and we talk a lot about this, Mara and I, from an organizational perspective, we like to give all of our employees the certainty of the future direction and to say, look, I know this was really hard, and this change we made here was really hard, but don't worry, over the next 5 years, we should be fine. That's not something that you can promise people. Our teams, it's not honest. I don't know that that's going to be the case. So you have to be able to explain to the organization, this is the direction. I mean, our role as leaders is to point out the direction of where we're taking the organization, what it is that we're trying to do, but at the same time, build an organization that is very agile and very adaptive. And I would say that tension between what we as humans like, which is predictability and stability, in an environment that is highly uncertain, and where you still, this is the new normal. So you can't sort of throw your hands up and say, well, this is it. I mean, if they can't tell me what it's like in 5 years, I'm not going to run this business very well. We have to run the business well and in a different way.
Well, I'm glad you didn't say getting good talent that works for you.
Yes, no. Well, and that is clearly, the other aspect, but I don't know that that's new. People truly are going to be the competitive advantage for organizations, and countries alike. Everybody's racing to have the most skilled talent pool and building a talent pipeline, that can execute on a strategy. Because all of the drivers that I talked about means it's going to be harder to attract and retain the people. People with skills will have plenty of options. The problem is exactly as you point, the people with no skills, they can create a lot of disruption and volatility in terms of political decisions and populism and geopolitical volatility with the Middle East blowing up. So, I mean, this is a very serious issue to deal with as well. But from an organizational perspective, it's going to be harder to find people with the top-notch skills. And as most of you all know, the difference between A-level skills and B-level skills in a world of, great digitization is not, one step up. It's exponential. It's a big difference. Please. And then one more question, and then Raul is going, no, never mind. Okay, never mind, talk less, let's all get going on the other part of the evening.
The answer is yes or no.
Yes.
First of all, thank you so much for your time and for this inspirational speech. And I would like to ask you about robotics. I imagine that you have already made some kind of research about what would be the impact of robotics in the organization. Could you tell us a little bit more about it?
Sure. We just did a big research with 20,000 employers across 18 countries. And over the short period, 80% of the employers are going to maintain their workforce or increase their workforce thanks to digitization. Mostly probably because they can take advantage of things and do more business. But our fundamental belief is this. We talked about these changes that have happened in the past. They happen. There's winners and losers. At the beginning, there's more losers than winners. But in the end, you create more jobs. So I think this is probably what's going to happen this time also. Because it's, we think, human ingenuity will create more jobs. What most people don't know is that these times of transformation in history, 20 to 30 to 40 years. And we think we are 5 or 10 years into that evolution. So this is going to feel messy and difficult for a while. And in some areas, more jobs will be lost than will be gained, at least in the short term. But it's hard to say how much of the work. We are not the believers of the Oxford study. 47% of the jobs are gone. So we have to have basic income, pay people for not working so that they don't riot in the streets. We don't believe in that extreme. Our view would be 5 to 10% maybe that would be automated fully. But a full 60 to 70% of the jobs will have a massive impact of technology.
I think the bigger issue is going to be how we develop people, because a lot of the entry-level jobs and white-collar jobs will be roboticized, and then the question is, how do I teach an accountant to be an accountant if they haven't learned how to do basic general ledger entries? And so I think learning is going to have to be, is even more important in organizations, because we have no clue how to train people if they just don't do it.
Right.
And that, I think, is going to, and that's happening, I think, quicker. That's probably going to be the next 3 to 5 years.
So we think the worry is not as much the jobs that are going to be eliminated, but the speed of the change and the increase of skills that you need to be competitive. So the worry is about how do you get people up to the skill level so they don't become obsolete skills that you then have to get rid of at the speed of the market and the client demand. Great question. Please.
Yo voy a hacer la pregunta en español. Yo quería saber, cuando se hace el ajuste en la agricultura, la gente migró a la industria. Cuando el ajuste en la industria llegó, la gente migró a los servicios. Es que ahora estamos en pleno ajuste en los servicios. Y eso tiene una connotación de que las empresas, la economía, vive para vender, pero no va a haber gente que compre. ¿Dónde están los límites en todo esto? En todos estos ajustes, en todas estas exclusiones de gente con no talento, con no conocimientos. Eso queda ahí, pero son gente que no compra, que no demanda. ¿Dónde está el límite? Porque habrá un límite.
I don't know if there is a limit, because if you would have asked the same question 40 years ago and you would have said, look, manufacturing is going to be 8% of the people. And there is something called the service economy, which in Spain is going to be 66% of the workforce. You would have said, no, that's not going to happen. And anyway, what the hell is a service economy? There can be, so while we think about manufacturing and agriculture as sectors that have been decimated in terms of workforce, at the same time, more food is ever being produced than ever before, and more products are being produced than ever before. So industrial and agricultural output is beating historical highs every year. It's just that the population working in agriculture is 2% and not, 50%. And we think that the next wave could be something we don't know, which is, the digital economy. So you have a service economy, maybe you have a digital economy, which could be the next wave, that is then, because parts of the service economy could be automated also. Self-service, how you buy tickets, how you check in at the airport. I mean, it's a service used to have everybody working on the counters, and today you have a machine that gives you your boarding pass, and you have one person doing the job of what used to be done by 10. So I don't know the answer, but I'm not sure. Every time people in the current times look ahead, they say, well, there's a limit. 20 years ago, all scientists agreed there is no way that you can have driverless cars. Impossible. Too many decisions, too much computational power needed, simultaneously, too much complexity, impossible, cannot happen. The whole scientific community thought about this really, really hard and said it cannot happen at all, ever. And here we are, and now we know it's a question of when, how, to what degree, and what jobs are going to be eliminated. So my safest prediction was that something else will come. We just don't know what it is. That's right. So with that, Raoul, yes, I think, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jonas and Mara. Vamos a intentar terminar en estos 10 minutos la segunda parte de lo que os queríamos contar hoy como respuesta precisamente, ¿no?, a estas competencias, a esta revolución de las competencias que hemos hablado y hemos hablado hoy aquí, trasladándonos un poco todo lo que hemos querido hacer. Hace exactamente, si me pones la presentación por favor, hace 2 años creamos el Human Age Institute, precisamente del Human Age que presentamos hace 8 años. Lanzamos este Human Age Institute en el que queríamos convertirnos en la mayor plataforma de talento, y al mismo tiempo ya percibíamos y lanzábamos que la empleabilidad de los jóvenes, especialmente de los jóvenes, pero también estamos viendo, ¿no?, de otras cohortes, ¿no?, dentro de nuestra España, iban a tener dificultades serias, ¿no?, de integración en el mercado. De hecho, anunciábamos que pese a que hemos creado casi 1,5 millones de empleos en estos últimos 15 meses, prácticamente solamente el 2% de los empleos ha ido a parar a esta franja entre los 15 y los 36 años, ¿no? Es decir, que por un lado tenemos esta bifurcación social que decía Jonas, prácticamente 600.000, 700.000 jóvenes con perfiles y con competencias prácticamente nulas o muy bajas, y al mismo tiempo también tenemos casi 200.000 jóvenes en este país que tienen competencias, están sobrecualificados, pero que no tienen la experiencia adecuada para entrar en el mercado de trabajo. Le vas dando así, está mal. Bueno, esto es lo que nos llevó ya hace 2 años a creer que teníamos que trabajar mucho en la empleabilidad como retorno de todos los que estamos aquí a la sociedad, y decidimos empezar a construir esto que nosotros hemos llamado la mayor experiencia de empleabilidad de España, y que queremos presentaros ahora, y que la hemos trabajado con parte de los que estáis aquí. Muchas de las compañías ya nos seguís y estáis apostando por ello, y hoy queríamos presentaros, en fin, todo el eje de acción que vamos a tener durante los próximos 2 años en esto que nosotros hemos llamado la revolución de las competencias, pero que también creemos que hay que pasar a la acción, no quedarnos solo en esta parte que decía nuestra querida presidenta, de qué hacemos entre todos, ¿no? Por ello, quería ponernos un vídeo muy representativo, son prácticamente 120 segundos, pero lo veréis de qué queremos trabajar en los próximos años con todos vosotros. Adelante, vídeo.
En septiembre de 2014, ManpowerGroup impulsa Human Age Institute, una iniciativa sin ánimo de lucro para dar respuesta a las necesidades de empleabilidad de los jóvenes y posicionar el talento en el centro de las organizaciones. Como líderes en el ciclo de la empleabilidad, promovemos soluciones en todas las áreas. Conocer para inspirar. Conocerse a uno mismo y conocer el entorno, complejo y cambiante, es fundamental para saber hacia dónde se dirige el mercado y, lo que es más importante, a dónde queremos llegar. Desarrollar para crecer. Es primordial, como parte del camino, desarrollar las competencias y habilidades más demandadas por el mercado. reducir el desajuste de talento entre los jóvenes y las necesidades de las organizaciones. Y por último, impulsar para avanzar. La finalidad de la empleabilidad es la activación y el crecimiento dentro de las organizaciones. Para conseguirlo, es necesario acercarse a las oportunidades del mercado. Becas, prácticas y ofertas de empleo para que el talento encuentre su lugar. La meta es el empleo. El motor de todo este ciclo es, y debe ser, la learnability. Esa curiosidad y capacidad de desarrollar habilidades que nos permite ser empleables a largo plazo. Esa energía que nos motiva para crecer y mejorar cada día. Queremos impulsar la empleabilidad de 500.000 jóvenes y con ese objetivo, Human Age Institute lanza PowerU, la mayor plataforma de empleabilidad del país que incluye diferentes iniciativas o soluciones pensadas para ofrecer respuestas en todo el ciclo de la empleabilidad. PowerU Digital, la plataforma de e-learning que permite desarrollar las 8 competencias seleccionadas por la Comisión Europea como habilidades clave para la progresión profesional. PowerU Plus, una aplicación móvil que recoge todo el conocimiento de los mentores de Human Age Institute, consejos prácticos para encontrar trabajo, ofertas de empleo y un nutrido calendario de actividades para el impulso de la empleabilidad. PowerU Experience, jornadas diseñadas para impulsar a nuestros jóvenes, compartir con ellos tendencias del mundo del empleo, potenciar su talento y desarrollar las capacidades profesionales de los jóvenes. Una oportunidad única para recoger todo el conocimiento de los mentores de Human Age Institute y aprender de la experiencia de directivos y profesionales de recursos humanos. PowerU University, un servicio integral que se desarrolla a través de los espacios Human Age Institute instalados en distintas universidades españolas con la finalidad de acercar el mundo laboral al mundo educativo, impulsando el talento y fomentando el deep learning en los jóvenes de hoy. 4 iniciativas interconectadas que hacen de PowerU la más completa experiencia de empleabilidad del país. Una plataforma con vocación integradora y abierta a todas las instituciones y compañías que desean impulsar la empleabilidad. Un punto de encuentro para los jóvenes que desean apostar por su futuro. Tenemos un objetivo claro y ambicioso: impulsar desde Human Age Institute un ciclo de la empleabilidad excelente. Contamos contigo para hacerlo posible.
Bueno, esto os queríamos contar y yo quería que Stefano Scavio, que es el fundador de PowerU, es decir, es una iniciativa europea que lanzamos hace exactamente 3-4 meses y que estamos presentando aquí en España, nos hable de PowerU Digital como las competencias claves que Europa, la Comunidad Europea ha definido y que nos gustaría también comentarlas con vosotros. Stefano, por favor.
Oh, thank you very much. So just to put into context a little bit, we were talking about talent, and Jonas set it up very well. And we were invited 2 years ago in Brussels. It was a World Economic Forum meeting. I went on your behalf, you remember. And we had a nice brainstorming with 15 top executives coming from the most important corporation around the world, and with 2 commissioners, and they want to understand a little bit, the impact of digitization on the different segments, on the different industry. And you know what? At the end of the day, it was really astonishing because everybody was talking about skills. And so it was really interesting to start talking with the commissioners about what we can do in order to help, especially young people, to be upskills about digital skills and soft skills. And that's actually where we started with PowerU Digital. I came back with my team and we started to think, about the 8 competencies that, by the way, also the European community was supporting at the time. And we decided to build up this platform. It's a very user-friendly digital platform for young people. I would suggest you really test it. It's really very nice, and you can get an open badge when you will be certified on the digital or soft skills that you see here in the platform. I believe it's a great opportunity for the young generation, but not only for the young generation, because we tested also with our associate, and you can understand where you are in your company, you know, with the digital culture. So I believe it's very important also for our organization in order to understand the journey that we have to make. But we think also a little bit more, and we decided, we started in Italy last October, and you know, we already have at the moment 6,000 young people applied. I don't know how many in Spain, but it's yeah. So, and we have really a great target. In 2 years, we want really to achieve 6 million of people, young people in Europe. And you know what we are doing? Something very nice. The people that got the certification, the young people that got the certification, we are giving to them a job opportunity in some of the most important companies in Italy in order, you know, to help the senior people to get, you know, a little bit more confident with digitization. So I believe this is a nice bridge between generations, and I believe this is, you know, it's very important for helping, you know, also the senior people understanding how we are changing the way we work, you know, and you know that digitization is really impacting a lot. So Jonas was saying before that we cannot stop, you know, the fourth industrial revolution. It's like stopping the wind with an hand. We cannot do it. We need to adapt ourselves. We need to skill and reskill the people. So that's the message. I believe that this is really very important for all the organization, all the employers, and so we are looking forward that you will join us in this social commitment, I would say, with young people, also for your organization. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefano.
And looking forward to talking with you later on.
Thank you. Gracias. Bueno, no, como vamos un poco de tiempo, no voy a explicar. Creo que entre el vídeo y la explicación de Jonas, de Stefano, creo que bueno, queda claro, pero es verdad que queremos contar bueno, por esos 500.000 jóvenes en España que puedan interactuar y que podamos darles este salto de empleabilidad y que desde luego contamos, hoy ya contamos con muchos de los que estáis aquí, que desde el inicio, ¿no?, habéis decidido ayudarnos a que esta iniciativa tenga retorno. Y yo para nosotros pues era realmente importante también compartirlo hoy con todos vosotros. Tenemos un plan a lo largo de los próximos trimestres con partners de primera línea como los que estáis aquí hoy para que esta iniciativa de empleabilidad sea realmente única en España. Y como veis aquí, queremos que forme parte de la empleabilidad de los jóvenes a través del plan de garantía juvenil que tiene la ministra. Queremos también pues que tengamos esta experiencia que estamos teniendo ya con miles de personas con Universia en las universidades. Tenemos también a Forética, que también está nuestro partner para desarrollar también en comunidades autónomas específicamente a través de cada uno de los consejeros que ya hemos avanzado en varios de ellos. Tenemos también la oportunidad de contar, ¿no?, con un ciclo próximamente con XL semanal, que también bueno, vamos a dar mucha experiencia y mucha voz a todos los que queráis hablar de cómo ser en este país más empleable y unir estas fuerzas, y lo vamos a hacer. Y por último, estamos trabajando también en qué paper vamos a hacer sobre cómo hacer que los jóvenes en este país tengan realmente esta activación y esta oportunidad. Todo esto lo vamos a hacer con vosotros y por eso queríamos también, bueno, pues compartirlo y que nos ayudéis en definitiva también a que esto sea una realidad. Vamos simplemente hoy a finalizar con la inauguración de esta oficial, de esta Talent Tower, que nos tiene que permitir seguir impulsando el talento. Lo hemos hecho en los últimos 30 años, casi 2 millones de personas de este país les hemos convencido, ¿no?, para que tengan más oportunidades en sus empleos actuales, más oportunidades de crecer en los que están, y esperamos que en los próximos 30 nos ayudéis también a que gracias a esta confianza que nos demostráis cada día podamos, que otros 2 millones de personas podamos influir para que crezcan y que sus vidas, en definitiva, personales también sean mejores. Muchísimas gracias a todos por venir. Brindamos con un vino ahí fuera. Gracias a todos.